most of my life up until I was 13 or 14 was probably lived through the TV.
I kind of felt like the world hated me.
I realized that adults could serve other purposes in your life than to be scary. We're going to hurt you. We're going to lie to you. We're going to try to manipulate you. I didn't grow up watching a marriage that one would want to emulate. The world's probably better if I'm just not in it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Melding Minds. I am your host, Clarence Abercrombie, and today I'm joined by Paul Berger. He is a red-blooded American living abroad in Germany.
Very true. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man.
Happy to.
How did you end up in Germany?
My wife is a contractor out here, so she got a job working on the military base, and initially we were going to try to do the long distance thing, but pretty quickly realized that was not appealing to either of us, and kind of sat there and thought about it and said, you know what, it makes the most sense. Like, let's get the move going. Let's get on out here, and haven't looked back. It's been a great decision.
Yeah. What do you like about Germany?
First and foremost, I love public transportation.
Nice.
I come from the Southeast United States where there is zero public transit. And so public transit, especially living so close to it. But also I'm a big history buff. So coming out here, being able to, wander around castles with dates like 4 on them, and that meaning the year 4 AD and things like that, or I guess we're CE and BCE now. But those two elements really attracted me initially. But then coming out here, just connected with this huge group of people out here, both Americans living abroad as well as different Germans and nationalities. I know some people from Italy, from the Netherlands and stuff like that. And being able to sort of dive in and immerse yourself in that much culture that quickly is pretty incredible. So
you've met some people while you've been out here. I'm assuming you love it just based on what you're saying. But have there been any challenges?
Absolutely. Plenty of challenges. Again, coming from the southeastern United States, I do miss my central AC.
Central AC. Americans won't understand how important central AC is until they're in a place where it doesn't exist, but it gets hot. Especially
on the top floor of any building.
Yes.
Because you just can't escape the heat.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of a little like creature comfort type of thing. Other difficulties, obviously for me, I don't speak German. So being out here and initially trying to learn to navigate these waters where a lot of people around us speak English, but when you go, into the further reaches and you start exploring more rural areas or areas where the population is seemingly a little bit older, you don't encounter as much English. So kind of trying to rely on my high school education German background. It gets me through a grocery store. It doesn't get me much further. Language is definitely something that you encounter, but I'm trying to think if there's not too many challenges other than the obvious of just being so far away from family and friends. That would be the number one. Rachel and I always talk about how much we love being out here, and if we could just relocate our family out here, we'd never leave.
Yeah.
But that is not a feasible maneuver.
And Rachel's your wife?
Yes, Rachel is my wife. Yes.
You mentioned that you grew up in the southeast of America. Whereabouts?
Nashville, Tennessee. Specifically south of Nashville in Franklin, which is a suburb. But spent most of my life in Nashville, lived a year in Seattle, but otherwise I have spent up until we moved out here when I was, I guess that was late 2021, early 2022. I spent most of my life in Middle Tennessee.
Tennessee, is that south?
Absolutely, it's south.
It's like edge south.
It's definitely south. It's south of Kentucky. It's well south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah.
It's south. Especially if you go to East Tennessee, it is south.
Yeah.
Middle Tennessee is a little bit more of a melting pot at this point because there's been a lot of industry move there. Nissan's moved to Nashville. Volkswagen's relocated to Chattanooga, things like that. So you get a lot of transplants from different areas. So Nashville has become a little bit more of a, most people you meet are not from Nashville at this point, I would say, in Nashville, which I think is a great thing.
What was it like growing up for you, man?
Growing up there's a lot of fun times. There's a lot of things that obviously you wish you could do over, but I do always try to maintain the mindset that like all of those things, good and bad, are what ultimately led me to the point I am now. Mm-hmm. So I'm very happy where I'm at now. And so wouldn't trade any of that. Growing up was interesting though. I am the youngest of three, but my older sisters are pretty significantly older than me. I mean, one is 4 years, one is 6 years older than me. So they were always at different stages. So I spent a lot of time early alone, kind of trying to figure out where I could fit in, trying to figure out how to make friends and that type of stuff. And I feel like as we all figure out as we grow up, the harder you try, the less likely it is to come to fruition. It wasn't really until 7th, 8th grade that I started getting comfortable with myself. And when I started getting comfortable with myself, I realized that the people that I wanted to be around were kind of naturally gravitating towards me. So for me, in a lot of ways, my life started when I was like 13, 14.
What do you mean by that?
Up until that point, I don't really feel like I was doing much by way of living. In terms of, elementary school, I was really just trying to kind of hide in the shadows, pretty uncomfortable with myself and didn't really want to interact, to be around people and stuff like that. And then going home, I'm obviously not close with my sisters. My parents were pretty busy. They did their best, but, my parents had their own balls in the air to juggle and things like that. So, most of my life up until I was 13 or 14 was probably lived through the TV, different television shows, movies, that type of stuff. And that still holds a really special place in my heart. I love to watch television shows. I love to rewatch television shows. TV characters become very close to me. They become like friends with me sometimes, which is why even if the show is really bad, I will still trudge through 8 seasons of it just because initially I'm like, well, I really like these people.
Yeah.
And so those early years, I really connected with those people on the screen because I didn't really have anybody else that I connected with.
Wow. I've heard someone say similar things about books for them, where they felt like their books were their friends. And, I think as we move into a more digital age, I think you're starting to see that kind of a transition for other people who kind of feel like they're in that space, right? Because I'm assuming there are a lot of kids who probably feel like they're in that space.
Definitely.
What would you tell them?
I would say that the lives that you see on the screen or in the books that you're reading, they exist. You can make those things. You can manifest those sorts of things in front of you. Something that really changed my life was a few teachers that really started to instill in me how much control you have over your reality. And kind of alluding to once I got comfortable with myself, the people that I wanted to be around started gravitating towards me. It's that type of situation where you really you have a lot more control than you think. And there is a lot of good to be gained from exploring these fictional worlds and exploring these, especially some of the like massively created universes, the Dunes and Lord of the Rings and those types of things. Imagination is a beautiful thing. It can take you a lot of places, but it's also important to figure out where you can merge your imagination and your reality. And if that means, going to Comic-Cons and dressing up like Battlestar Galactica characters and meeting people that do the same thing, that's great. If that just means, acting on a stage in straight plays or musicals or choir. Choir was choir and theater were a very formative thing for me. I was always very good at those things. And that, of course, makes them more appealing, especially for me I've always found myself very naturally good at certain things. And when I was younger, really enjoyed leaning into those and not necessarily trying to figure out how to be good at the things that were hard for me.
Yeah.
And eventually for me, I figured out a way to make those things that were easy, hard. You do more difficult choral pieces. You start writing your own music. You start branching out and performing one-act plays where you're the sole focus and you have, 20 minutes where you have to keep people engaged. And those types of challenges really pushed me and helped me figure out the reasons why you work hard. I think that's something that I struggled with as a kid in watching those TV shows and movies and stuff like that, is bridging the gap of like, how do I get there?
Yeah.
That looks hard, but I really like the life they have. How do I do that?
Yeah.
And I was actually talking with my wife about this yesterday. It's not until you really start to, and this is metaphorical, but it's not until you start to get hit that you can learn how to take a hit. And I spent a lot of my younger life sequestering myself so deeply to avoid ever being hit because I didn't know how I was going to respond. And once I allowed myself to open up and be wrong and be corrected and be embarrassed sometimes, and recognizing that that's okay, that's when the most growth started to happen. That's why I do say, like, it's those 13, 14 years for me when things really started to click and life really started to happen, because that's when growth really started to happen for me.
Why do you think you had that desire to protect yourself, though?
I think a lot of that comes from, so my upbringing, my father is, he is sober now, but he is an alcoholic, and was my whole life, and spent a lot of our upbringing trying to conceal that from us. So he would almost just go through the motions where, like, he would be at the things that we were doing. Like, he would come to my baseball game, but he was drunk, so he wasn't really there. And so then you just instinctively as a kid want to protect yourself because you're ready for that other shoe to drop. You're ready for, my dad was never he was never physically abusive in any way, but my dad did have a temper. He would yell, he would scream, and that was scary. And so I would hide. It makes a lot more sense as a kid to hide from the big scary thing than to try to slay the monster. And even when you're watching these TV shows or reading these books where the whole, hero's journey archetype is the hero goes through the struggle and the hero comes out the other side and slays the dragon. I mean, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
And that's adult stuff. You think, you're watching these adults do these things. And again, it wasn't until I really started to be around teachers that I could trust and teachers that I really respected that I realized that adults could serve other purposes in your life than to be scary.
Wow.
And my parents did the best they could. I'm not here to rag on them. I'm not here to drag them down. Everybody has their vices. I myself found myself years later dealing with alcoholism as well. And which is a pretty natural cycle. I think if we trace back our genealogy, my dad is an alcoholic. I believe his uncle, my mom's uncle, it runs in the blood. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, you get these mixed messages, you know, you hear from your teachers, oh, just go home and ask your parents. They'll help you with this. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, is that something I can do? Like, or, you know, I mean, my parents just weren't really there in that capacity for me.
Yeah.
There was 3 of us, you know, my parents are pastors, so like not a real lucrative income.
Yeah.
And they're living in a pretty wealthy area. So they had to work a lot. They had to kind of scrimp and save and do everything they could to make things work. And alcoholism is an expensive habit. So a lot of money is probably being funneled to that. And then that's furthering tension between my parents. And so I didn't grow up in a very comfortable environment. I didn't grow up watching a marriage that one would want to emulate.
Yeah.
That impacted me later in life in relationships when I struggled to really figure out what a relationship was supposed to look like. But yeah, I think the long and the short of it is, for me as a little kid, I spent a lot of my life scared and not having anybody to really tell me it was going to be okay and to figure out a way to work out of it.
And so those characters were kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel for you.
Yeah. They were successful.
Yeah.
They got out of it, whatever it was. And especially in the context of television shows, it's so nice because you get this very quick, almost like a dopamine high of you watch them encounter a problem and in 22 to 42 minutes, they've solved that problem.
Yeah, it's fixed.
Yeah. And they're on to greener pastures. And so trying to encapsulate things like that really struck me and really appealed to me. But yeah, it's any kid that's going through those types of things, whether they are related to parents or they're related to bullies or whatever it is, it's just, for me, it's all about figuring out who those people are that you can trust, and then recognizing that through those people, you can manifest the reality that you are looking for.
I think our society really undermines the importance of teachers.
Definitely.
I had a similar moment in my life where I was struggling with something. Actually, I'll just talk about it. Mm-hmm. I actually had anger issues growing up as a kid. Mm-hmm. There are lots of reasons I was angry. I kind of felt like the world hated me. I had a kindergarten teacher tell me I would never amount to anything. Mm. Think about that. Like at that age. And so I was just really, really angry. And one teacher, one time when I was trying to be better about it, I had this chain, and I remember I'd worked all summer to save up money to be able to buy this chain. And I was like, man, I got this nice chain. It had a cross on it. It was really, really nice. And this kid grabbed my necklace and broke it. And normally I would have snapped, man. Mm-hmm. But I remember holding it in my hand. I took a deep breath, exhaled, mm-hmm. and I just tried to process it internally. The next day, the teacher came in and told me that she wanted to see me after class. And I was like, what do I do now, man? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm trying my best, right? And she pulls me aside and she was like, hey, I've seen you get upset over way less. And I just want to let you know that I'm proud of you for controlling yourself. And I know it's not as nice as the one you had, but I wanted to give you this to replace your necklace. Mm-hmm. And it was a cross. She tried to get it as close as possible. Yeah. But man, that changed my life. Yeah. That one moment changed mm-hmm. my life. Mm-hmm. So I don't think society understands that sometimes that external influence that teachers provide is really, really important to the development of our youth. Because I know it was for me. It sounds like it was for you.
Definitely.
For you as well.
Yeah. it is not an overstatement to call teachers the backbone of our society in many ways, because anyone who finds themselves on a path where they are successful, the most world-changing people in the world, can point to a teacher in first grade or fifth grade or ninth grade or whenever it was that they showcased something to them that taught them a lesson that wasn't, you know, the dates of the Civil War
or math
algebra or anything. It's these lessons that you are learning how to be a person, and you are learning that the degree to which you can impact someone else's life and positively impact somebody else's life. And taking that with you in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind, wherever it is, it lives there forever.
Yeah.
And teachers just do that. That's just, you know, and I think that's part of why they don't get the appreciation that they do, because they just show up and do it. And, you know, the paycheck's not good, but it's sort of like, I mean, they are two completely different professions, but when you think about the utilities or like garbage pickup and stuff like that, you know, that's something that we don't notice until it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
We just take it for granted that it's happening and it's going and it's going. And it's the same type of thing with teachers, where teachers just show up to school. They teach anywhere from 20 to 30 kids in one block, 7 different times a day sometimes. And we wouldn't really notice until they stopped doing it. And even still, it would take years and years and years of society developing in a way that was not influenced by teachers for us to say, damn, what changed?
Yeah.
I for a long time, I wanted to be a teacher.
Really?
Yes. To be completely honest, was entirely based around the fact that teachers, for me, even though I was not a good student, I did not like doing my homework. Again, you know, that sort of natural aptitude. I didn't do my homework. I could take the test and I could pass it. And so many teachers just met me where I was on that. They didn't try to harp on me or, you know, slap my hand and say, hey, you've got to do your homework. You got to do your homework. They would do that, but then they'd also recognize, like, okay, why? Like, why don't you really want to do your homework? You know, you are very smart. Let's like sit down and really unpack this. You know, what's the reasoning? And yeah, that when I got older started to click in my head of like, oh man, you know, that sounds great. I'd love to be able to influence somebody like that. And then ultimately I realized that like my real desire is just to be with people and work with people in whatever capacity it is. However I can work with and work for people and make their lives better is what nourishes my soul. But I don't think that I would have really clicked into that and pursued that in the way that I did if I hadn't had that type of influence so young.
I think part of the problem is that there's no way to quantify it, right? It's easy to measure teachers on the metric of how many of their students pass said standardized test. It's very hard to measure them on the metric of, hey, how many of your students went on to be productive members of society that contributed in a positive way to our community, whether that's a national community, a local community, a global community, whatever. I think because we can't quantify it, I think that is a metric that is missed when it comes to measuring the importance of teachers.
Yeah. Well, because success is the finish line of success is different for literally every person. And just being able to get the most out of somebody, whatever that most is a success. And to your point, that is nearly impossible to quantify, because not every student is going to graduate high school, go to Harvard, get a PhD, and even that in itself is sort of an arbitrary metric for success that we've just accepted. Like, oh, these are big, bold words that really tell us somebody has achieved things.
Yeah.
But it's also at the same time, if you have enough money, you can go to Harvard. Like, not discounting anyone that has gone to Harvard and has succeeded, and that it is an incredibly hard institution and your education is probably great, but it's not the be all end all of, oh wow, he became the president of the United States. Great. But also people that have just found themselves very happy in a career with a family and a good network of people and do some fun things on the weekend and stuff like that. That to me is just as much as a success as any of the grand, broad visions that we have of it. And that's where a teacher comes in, of recognizing no matter what, we can get somewhere. And that's sort of to me, teachers are the ultimate people that recognize the least of these, that sort of that cliche that does fly around, but teachers being willing to work with anyone, regardless of working with a kid with anger issues, working with a kid that will do anything in his power to be completely invisible and going out of their way to make sure that that kid knows he is not invisible. And that doesn't show up on a standardized test.
Yeah.
And really, they don't get paid for that. I mean, that teacher bought that chain out of her own pocket. Those are the little things that, like, that she wasn't able to write that off as like a school board expense. She saw something and she said, this kid needs to be recognized for this.
I want to go back to something that you said earlier. Did you feel invisible, or did you want to be invisible?
That's a tough question, because there are moments when I could track both being accurate for me. I think that if I look at my later life, it was much more that I felt invisible than I wanted to be invisible. Because as I grew up, I really gravitated towards the stage and brightly colored clothes. And, I seized every opportunity to, like, dance at the pep rally or, meet everybody at the party and that type of stuff. And so, like, the minute that it clicked with me, I ran with it in a big demonstrative way that almost, could pretty easily be qualified as like overcorrecting or overcompensating for these previous feelings that I was at the time not really conscious of and was likely just running away from. It's hard to know what to do with feeling comfortable with yourself, especially when you're, 13, 14 years old, because you're only like semi-comfortable with yourself. You're also like either going through or about to go through puberty, or trying to figure out like how to ask somebody out, or, trying to figure out what's cool, what's popular, that type of stuff. And so it's sort of a roving finish line in that regard. But I don't know. I really, when I look back on myself as a kid, I really felt invisible. And it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because, you know, as I said, I'm a big believer in being able to manifest your own reality. And so the more that you tell yourself, oh, I feel invisible, or, you know, nobody sees me, nobody wants to hear what I'm saying, then poof, you know?
Yeah. I would think as a child in a situation where you didn't feel safe, that there's probably a part of you, and you can tell me if you disagree, but there's probably a part of you that did want to feel invisible, that wanted to disappear, which is sad.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that crops up later in my life in dealing with alcoholism.
Yeah.
Because anyone who's gone through treatment or addiction knows that the substance is the symptom, it's not the problem. And so my drinking was to, I mean, for lack of a better term, you know, kind of erase these feelings and these thoughts and these things that I'd been running from and not dealing with. And I think it goes right into your point of, you know, wanting to be invisible and feeling like that's the easiest way for things to go. You know, if I can just numb all this down, quiet all this down, and just sink into the chair, everything will be fine.
Were there ever any thoughts of self-harm?
Absolutely. I had plenty of instances, especially in my early 20s. I'm 33 now, and so this is about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
When I was really back and forth. I had not yet admitted that I had a serious problem with alcohol, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I couldn't just go to the party and have fun like all of my friends. I didn't understand why, you know, I would rather lock my room and drink by myself than go out and do whatever. And then with that start to come the mistakes, start to come, you know, I got a DUI, and I got multiple underage drinking citations and those types of things. And then you just start to think like, man, the world's probably better if I'm just not in it.
Wow.
And again, self-fulfilling prophecy. You tell yourself that enough times and it becomes a very real truth. And then it starts to seem very appealing the more you repeat it to yourself, because then you start stacking all of the stuff that's going on in your life and you're like, well, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this if I was just gone.
How do you escape that darkness?
Therapy, and really, really good friends. I am surrounded by some of the best people that I believe have ever been put on this earth. People with an unlimited capacity to forgive, because if you're going through addiction, you have to have people around you that are willing to forgive, or be prepared to find completely new groups of people when you are not forgiven, which is totally their choice. I was fortunate enough that my friends would not let me disappear. They knew what I was going through before I knew what I was going through. That's always how it is with the addict. You know, you think you've got everything so buttoned up and concealed, and it's like you're the last one to know that you've got a really serious problem and you need to deal with it. But they wouldn't let me disappear. They just drug me along and drug me along and drug me along. And now in sobriety, they get to really enjoy and love this person that they always saw. I think that's the biggest thing is my friends always saw who I really was, not the persona that I was putting on or the, hurt inner child that existed. They just saw who I was and loved that person and never let me forget it. And therapy.
I think friends like that are super valuable. It is a rare thing to be able to exist maskless. The spaces that you can do that, the people that you can do that with. It is an even rarer thing for people to see your mask and to be able to see through it. The people who can do that, I believe, are super, super valuable. And if you find someone like that, you need to keep them around, especially if they're willing to put up with your bullshit.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of those things where I remember going through active addiction, going through initial treatment, relapsing, going through treatment again, relapsing, and every single time, the same people showing up. And I mean, I credit to my parents showed up too. They were still dealing with their own demons and still dealing with their own struggles, but they didn't let me, end up homeless. They didn't let me, fall by the wayside. But I mean, my friends, most of them I have known since 9th grade. And there's about 10 or 12 of us that have run together since we were about 14 years old. And I mean, we've seen each other through every single stage and every single issue and every single crisis. And we've also celebrated every single success. And, it's an incredibly rare thing that I am fortunate enough to be a part of. And yeah, it's that type of thing that keeps your friends telling you that it is worth it when, you've relapsed for the second time and you're sitting there thinking like, I'm just not cut out for it. Let me just drink myself to death. That's what it is. Like, this is my life, and them not taking that and not saying, all right, well then see ya. A lot of people could do that. And I don't blame them. It's hard to go on the road with an addict. Because we're going to hurt you. We're going to lie to you. We're going to try to manipulate you. We're going to show you the worst versions of ourselves far more often than you're going to see the best versions of ourselves. And having people around you that are willing to remember that best version of yourself every time you steal money from them or lie to them or, whatever the transgression may be, for them to every time be able to say, all right, well, that pisses me off and you suck, but I'm picking you up Sunday. We're going to the Titans game. Those are the types of things that keep you floating. If I didn't have them, I mean, there's no telling how long ago I was sunk.
There's a couple of lessons in that from my perspective. I think that there is a lesson in that from an addict's perspective, right? Your personal experience. But I think there's another lesson for the people around that person to not give up on them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's very easy to end up in a space to just kind of be like, I've done everything I can do, dude.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I think that most people struggle with is how long do you keep going?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
I think that you were very fortunate to have friends who never gave up on you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the best advice would be in a situation like that, at least from my perspective. What would you say it is?
That's a very tough conversation because as an addict, you are taught early on when you start going through treatment that no one owes you anything. And so if people walk out of your life, people walk out of your life, and that's their prerogative. So you're taught not to spend a lot of time dwelling on how long should you stick around. I think that the mantra for addicts can be really just the same as the mantra for those close to the addict, and that is the one day at a time where, all right, I'm with you today. I don't know if I'm going to be with you tomorrow, but I'm with you today. And for an addict, a day can be a lifetime, especially in early portions of recovery. I think for those loved ones of addicts, that a day is the only chunk that you can really guarantee. And you can pick and choose your days. It can be I'm here for you today, and then I do something that is just egregious, and you say, listen, I can't be around you for a little while. And that's totally understandable. But if it's worth it, come back and say, all right, you got me for today. It could be a week, it could be a month, it could be however long passes. But I don't know. It's such a hard situation because there is no one on this planet more manipulative and cunning than an addict attempting to get their next fix of whatever that thing is. And so I think for me, that's why my friends stuck around, is because I'd known them for so long. I'd known them since I was 13 years old. So they had a pretty good gauge on when I was being genuine or when I was working an angle. And so they would just call me out on it. And I think as a friend of an addict, that's something that you have to be willing to do, is you have to, because they always talk about enablers being part of the problem. And it's not an enabler's fault, but you are doing a disservice to the addict if you're not just saying, listen, I know you're full of shit. Like, we can sit here and we can watch a movie. I'm not going to give you $5 to go buy a taco because I know that's not what you're doing. Like, and that's why I don't begrudge certain people walking away, because that's a hard thing to do. Because addicts don't just say, oh, all right, call me. Like, darn. No, we fight because it's more important to us. Like, for me, it was more important for me to get a drink than it was whatever was going on your end. That was the most important thing to me in the world for 6 to 8 years of my life was alcohol. More important. I was in multiple relationships during that time. I had friendships, I had family, I had all kinds of things. None of it mattered if I couldn't also drink. So I don't know. It's not a one size fits all sort of situation. Because it's all about just what your bandwidth is. How much are you willing to put up with? I it's hard to gauge that going in.
Can you see today the version of yourself that your friends saw in you in your worst moments?
Mm-hmm. It's the person that I am today. It's the reason why I stay sober.
How does it feel to know that?
It's a really incredible feeling. A big thing that they talk about through recovery is that you have to do it for yourself. You're never going to be successful if you try to get sober for somebody else. And for me, it was almost, it's wild to meet yourself. When you're 28 years old. And you might as well go through introductions and talk about like past experiences and it's a brand new thing when you encounter this individual that you're like, oh shit, this is why my friend stuck around. Because it's not enough just to recognize that person exists. You have to figure out how to get to that person and how to like that person. And that's the thing I struggled with most through addiction, was just this deep-seated disdain for myself. And so when your friends tell you things like, oh man, so glad you came over, it's great. In the back of your mind, you're like, no, you're fucking lying. Like, I'm the worst. I don't even want to be around me. Why do you want to be around me? And so when you finally do go through recovery for the right reasons, and you get to that point where you're meeting this version of yourself that is the actual real you, it's not an understatement to say it is a life-changing experience. Being able to audibly say that I like myself is something that I never thought I would be able to do.
Well, I'm proud of you, man. Proud of you for being able to do that. I think that there are lots of people who struggle with that. People who struggle with self-confidence. People, you know what I mean, that really, really struggle to appreciate themselves and where they are, and to meet themselves where they are. Well, you talked about success a little bit earlier. What's your personal definition of success?
What I just talked about. Being able to like who you are and like where you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter who you're doing it with. But if you're able to achieve those two things, to me, you are as successful as anybody in this world. To not have anything in the back of your mind gnawing at you saying you could be doing this, you should be doing that, meeting this intersection of, it's almost like a nirvana type of situation where you are simultaneously extremely happy with yourself and proud of yourself, and happy with where you are and proud of your circumstances. Like even right now, my job, I manage a thrift store on the airbase, and it's a great job. By no stretch would it be considered a career or something that I'm, building on and trying to turn into something else. But it's a great job, and I built a great team, and I'm surrounded by so much kindness and thoughtfulness, and I get to help the community, and I get to meet all kinds of different people. And it's great. I work 3 days a week. I don't make much money, but it doesn't matter. And I think those types of situations are where it really becomes a successful situation, where you are not wanting for more. Or I guess more, you are not needing for more. It's always reasonable to want more, but not waking up every morning thinking like, oh man, I just wish I found something that fulfilled me. Being able to find fulfillment where you are, I think, is a skill, and I think that to me is a true measure of success.
What is a difficult conversation that we as a community should be having that we're not having? And where should that conversation start?
I think that an extremely difficult, uncomfortable subject that people don't really want to talk about, that they need to work towards having a conversation about, is the degree to which personal views have interwoven themselves with the larger scale of society. Specifically speaking towards the way that religion has wrapped itself around what we are now forming as national and global policy on things. The widespread inability of people to just have a personal belief be a personal belief and not need that personal belief to be reflected in grand scale is, to me, what is the driving force behind this Grand Canyon of a rift that we have in larger society these days. Like being able to sit across from someone who has opposing views on abortion that I do, but us not need to shout the other one down and be right about it, but rather be comfortable with ourselves in the fact that, like, this is my belief and this is a belief that I hold close to my heart. That is your belief, and that is a belief that you hold close to your heart. It doesn't need to be fought about in global contexts.
So, first of all, I agree. I think the problem with it, though, is that people from a religious background feel like they have a mandate to uphold their beliefs within their community. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if I believe that abortion is murder after conception, mm-hmm. then I have to prevent that murder from happening. Otherwise, I'm complicit. So how do you create a society that allows for religion, freedom of religion even, mm-hmm. without allowing for those beliefs, if they are popular enough to get representation within a government? How do you prevent those from becoming policy that everyone has to live with?
I feel like that's really the rub, is because at the end of the day, the government is a representative government. And so elected officials are going to reflect someone's ideology. And it's hard. It's all, to me, so much more successful in the micro than the macro. It's so much easier to have to build from small circumstances within a community, and then all of a sudden my parents are pastors. My parents are very religious, mm-hmm. but my parents also have an endless amount of space to allow for those other views and those other beliefs. Mm-hmm. And it's very successful for them in their small community. it doesn't succeed as things get bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know, I would love to be able to solve that in the world, because I do think that there are so many potential friendships and relationships and nourishing interactions that are being lost because things are just so vehemently divided in the way that they are. Because I enjoy having conversations with people that I disagree with. I don't feel like we need to get to the end of the conversation and either of us have a different opinion. I can walk away from somebody happily holding on to my belief and them happily holding on to theirs. And I just don't know how we, short of, having intensive conversations with every single individual on the earth, I don't know how we grow that in a government.
I think a lot of it has to do with I don't want to say the media, because I feel like that's like people just throw that out to just blame something. Mm-hmm. But I do think the mediums that we do use, the mediums that we interact with, do largely inform our beliefs. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that has to do with just people don't have time to do their own research. So they pick their person, mm-hmm. right? They go, hey, I liked what this guy's saying. I believe this guy. And then from that moment on, I'm going to believe what he's got to say about it.
Yeah.
So you end up getting these tribes. And as those beliefs end up being pushed more to the left, more to the right, you end up getting a greater divide in the middle. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that when you break down most arguments, most of us kind of fall in the middle. Yeah. Not necessarily in the sense of, hey, I believe this 100%. I'm always like in the middle, mm-hmm. but I can live with that thing in the middle, like my mom believes that life happens at conception. Mm-hmm. That's not what I believe.
Right.
But when I pressed her further, she was like, yeah, it would be a travesty if you aborted a child at any point after conception. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, but if it didn't have a heartbeat, could you live with that? She's mm-hmm. like, I wouldn't be happy about it, but yeah, it would make sense. Mm-hmm. I go, okay, well, that is what middle ground looks like, right? There are some people who go, no, it can have a heartbeat. It can have a heartbeat, but if it doesn't have a functioning brain, there's no function there. There's no person actually. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you get into the weeds, you could end up having a lot of varying beliefs. The thing about a society is, what can we all live with, right? So I think the only way to fix it that I've been able to come to is this. Conversations like this, putting it out into the universe, man, and seeing what mm-hmm. happens. I feel like the more that we have normal people talking about our issues, the things that we care about, mm-hmm. and people hear someone else echo what actually resonates with them, mm-hmm. I think you'll find people get more comfortable with, oh, actually, no, I'm okay with that.
Right. I agree with that. I also think in relationship to, the initial mention of things like the media and particular, the politicians that are on the TV the most regularly, I think a big problem is that the dog whistle issues are the ones that get people interested.
Get them motivated, make them show up at the polls.
It's not interesting for you to stand in front of a group of people and be like, I-31 is terrible. We need to repave that road. We need our infrastructure to look better. We need plumbing in cities to look better. Those are not sexy, like headline grabbing issues. You're gonna get more airtime if you are lobbing grenades on things that push people into one corner or the other. And that's across the board. That's not just the media. That's on the politicians in town hall meetings. That's on all of those things where there are a ton of issues that we could be talking about. Mm-hmm. And we always seem to land on these, what are very black and white issues in people's minds of the, abortion or gay marriage or immigration and things like that, that just, it's like you said, they get people to the polls. They get people voting one way or the other. A politician who just comes out and is like, listen, I'm going to keep my beliefs on those issues to myself. What I think we need to focus on are the things that really do impact our daily life. And we don't really have that. That's not a conversation that exists. That's not representation that exists. And even when it does exist, it very quickly gets turned into a different conversation. And all of a sudden you've lost the plot from the original point. And, it's exactly what you said. It's all about ground level conversations, where people are willing to listen. And that's the thing that sort of gets lost in all of this, is that generally speaking, people are more willing to listen than they are represented to be. At least what I've found, and I'm sure you found the same thing. It's just when things jump from 0 to 100 that immediately you feel like you have to pick a side, and you can't like this person because they're on the opposite side of you. And it's like, man, we agree on like 95% of things.
Yeah, but this 5% makes you hate me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, we've gotten so wrapped up in, or we're so focused above the people, and we're not really focused on the people themselves. I think that's one of the problems with our government both being labeled as a representative government, but also not consistently really representing us. The amount of politicians in states that are willing to push certain issues one way or the other, despite consistent polling evidence and stuff like that, that might say their constituents aren't in that camp. Them believing that it sort of falls in line with religious individuals who believe they have this mandate to do this thing. Politicians often fall in this trap of believing they have this mandate from the people, that I have to decide that this is good or bad. And it's like, hold up.
Yeah. You could ask your constituents.
Like, what if it wasn't just you that was deciding? Because we didn't really elect you to be that.
Yeah.
And that's, we lost the plot on that, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But I like to believe that the initial groundwork and functions of our government was designed to be something closer to that, where you really were just a proxy for your people and not as much this pillar that's supposed to represent either light or dark or red or blue or whatever. And it's hard to, everything's just so deeply entrenched now that it's hard to break the way that things are woven. But I think exactly what you're talking about, what we're doing here, conversations like this, having more conversations with people that you don't agree with, is something that would benefit society far more than anything else.
Yeah. and showcasing what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
You know, I look back at some of the debate videos from like the 1960s.
Yeah.
And I'm blown away.
Absolutely.
By how well they were able to articulate their points and not get upset with each other while also calling out each other for,
absolutely,
you know, the hypocrisy within their own arguments. Like, it's very, very beautiful to watch.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is our transition into a very soundbite based society where people aren't watching. That's from an era when people were sitting down and watching a long form hour and a half debate or listening to it on the radio or whatever it was. But now, whatever debate it is, whether it's a presidential debate or a vice presidential debate or Senate or whatever it is, they know in the back of their minds, somebody's going to watch a 7-second TikTok clip. So I can't waste any of this. You know, there's a lot of just charged language and buzzwords and things that I feel like they're told, you got to slip this into this answer. You got to slip this into this answer. And it becomes much more of a performance than an actual example of, all right, we're going to sit down and learn about these people that we are considering electing to the highest office or whatever it is.
An informed constituency is super important to a functioning democracy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information you can get in a minute, man.
Nope. And that's exactly what it is. It's hard to really learn anything in 30 to 60 seconds.
Yeah. It's the nuance, right? Like, so you can say something in a minute, but you can't really extract the nuance within that time frame. And I think that when we're talking about these things, we're saying, oh yeah, we largely agree about this, we agree about that. But then we go, but how? But how do you get to that? Well, that's the nuance of the argument. And that's what we're not getting to.
Yeah. It's not, nothing is afforded the time and the attention that it really does need. I mean, politics is the same as anything, it's the same as how a dining table that was made in 1920 is still going to be a great, beautifully functioning dining table today versus a dining table that you buy at IKEA that 5 years from now is barely functioning. I mean, it's the time and the attention and the craftsmanship of something like that gives it its staying power. Everything right now is just so fast and immediate, and it's moving at a pace that no constituency could possibly inform themselves to an adequate degree. It's and factor in the fact that most politicians are running for re-election a year after they get elected. You never really even get to see them do these things.
Yeah. I'm not mad at that, right? I'm not mad at them preparing for re-election, but do something.
Yeah.
Right? Do something to earn you being reelected. And if you're thinking about that day 2 on the job, I go, great.
Yep.
Because I want you to work for me as someone you are representing.
Yep. The best way to think about reelection is to think about what can I do to keep my job? And what you can do to keep your job is something.
Yeah.
And pass something. Draft something. You can't fault anybody for not succeeding at things in a government that is represented by there's 436 in the House, there's 100 in the Senate. You got there's so many people and so many different elements and so many ways that something can fail. But I want to see you try.
Yeah.
And I think in certain circumstances we lose a little bit of that, where somebody sort of gets a stranglehold on a district and then just realizes like, I can keep running and keep running and keep running and keep getting elected. Great. Like, and that's both sides. That's Democrats, that's Republicans. You got people that are spending, 60 years in government and probably less to attach to their name than somebody who's been there 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down to that very forgotten but important word of representation, represent me. I elected you because I liked you and I like some of the things you said. Now, prove me right.
Yeah, I think that the problem with the represent me thing is that, and I had a conversation with a member on a previous podcast about this, is that when we're talking about representation, largely what ends up happening is that the candidate who spends the most money ends up winning.
Yeah.
So if I go, okay, my donors are the ones giving me all this money so that I can run these ads, and that ultimately is showing, hey, is revealing itself to me as that's how you win. I go, well, who do I care about? Do I care about my constituents who voted for me?
Right.
Or do I care about the people who are running ads to those constituents to get them to vote for me?
Yep.
And I think that's the real problem, is that the reason that your representatives don't represent your interest is because there's somebody in the middle who's intercepting that, who's like, nope, I need you to do these things for me. Otherwise, I'm not going to give you money, or I'll primary you with some other candidate and I'll give them the money that I was going to give you so that you don't get reelected.
Yep. Yeah. The multi-billion, at this point, I would say across the whole government, it's certainly probably a multi-trillion-dollar industry that has become our representative government. Is, like I said earlier, that is why it has completely lost the plot. The fact that there is very little tracking or oversight on those types of things, where large special interest groups can funnel millions and millions and millions of dollars to, just like you said, either get a candidate elected or kill a candidate's campaign. It's insane.
Yeah.
And the trouble is that the ones who would have to enact legislation against those types of things are the people that are in place through the money that, it's a circle. Yeah, that was, I can't remember when what was that, like mid 90s, when I think it was Clinton that signed off on the super PAC functionality and stuff like that. And then the mid 2000s, when corporations were deemed people, and
I think that's the big one.
It's the biggie. Once corporations were deemed people, then all bets were off, and they could anonymously donate as much money as they want to at all times. And it's just been a slippery slope. And yeah, now you end up with a government full of people that talk like they represent us and, are really representing whatever lobby they're behind.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of takes the conversation a little bit of a full circle here. Do you realize that by doing this, you have now become one of those characters that you used to watch as a kid?
As in, by doing this podcast and this conversation,
yeah,
I've sort of found my way to like a culminating recap of the circumstances.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that until you said it. And I feel like it's what I was always destined to be.
Yeah.
I think that's, again, to tie it back to the life of an addict, the way that we succeed, the way that we help others is we talk about it. We talk about what we go through. We talk about what we've been through. And I think something that I forget is that there are other parts of people's lives that are important to talk about too. I feel like I kind of intentionally avoid talking about my childhood, not thinking about the fact that there are definitely kids out there that are dealing with things similar or worse than I dealt with. Not thinking about the way that conversations have helped me and could help more. And so I think that's, you bringing that up is that's a cool perspective to take on it. And it does kind of remind me that, there's a lot of parts of people's lives that are important to talk about. It's not just the very like specific struggles and things like that, but any of those parts.
Yeah, man, the vulnerability is key.
Yeah.
Like, you never know what you're going to say that is going to help somebody else through a tough time. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate your courage to come on the podcast and do this.
Yeah.
Dude, the conversation was amazing. I hope we can do a part 2 in the future if you're open to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think there's definitely more to talk about here.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I had a blast.
And thank you guys for joining us. And we'll see you next time.